Welcome. Welcome, Rabbi Soloveichik, Eliza, Dr. Edinger, Rose, Zachariah, Malka, Nava, David, Rabbi Rode. Where is everyone? I thought we were, this was the Hatanim celebration. To celebrate our Hatanim for this year, 5781, or the year 2020, which is about as obscure a year as, I don't think it behooves the name 2020, but let me ask, where is everyone? Z what? They're in that thing? Okay, let me be clear. The year is 1705, the year of our Lord, 5465. And it is that year because that is the first year where we have written evidence of the wholesome rules and restrictions of Congregation Shereth Israel, which at that point was about 50 years old. We had rules and regulations before then. I think at the time people weren't as concerned about saving for posterity. I think they were more concerned about holding on to the gossamer threads of their lives and freedom. But in 1705, we have the wholesome rules. I am the Parnas, and these wholesome rules identify only two other people who, it is said, with the Parnas were dignitaries granted the authority to govern the congregation in the fear of God and in accordance with their conscience. The first assistant to the Parnas was the Hatan Torah. The second assistant to the Parnas was the Hatan Bereshit. And Dr. Edinger, our Hatan Torah, and Rabbi Soloveichik, our Hatan Bereshit. And there was no board of trustees. There were no executive directors. There was no constitution. Nobody had a constitution. Constitution comes 100 years later. Ours is still one of the first constitutions. But even at the time of our constitution, there is no sexton, there is no service, there is no rabbi. There are Hatanim. And the simple point is that we have always had Hatanim, and we need Hatanim, and we're desperate for our Hatanim this year. The Edinger family will, in due course, roughly 200 years after 1705, begin a stint of service to our congregation similar to basically no other family. There have been many families that have been here 16, 18 generations, but the Edingers and the Gedalias have given service to our congregation for over 100 years. And not just to our congregation, but to our Torah synagogue congregation as well. And we thank you for that, but that's many years in the future. Right now, all you are is Hatan. And yes, I have heard him say many times that he is the 10th minister since the revolution. But there is no revolution in 1705. There is no rabbi until 1855, no one lecturing, no one teaching, but there is a Hatan. And what our Hatanim have always meant to us is two things: leadership in service and leadership in services. The travail of this year is that we basically don't have services. We're doing the best we can. Reverend Edinger, Henry's son, is getting old more quickly than he should with his efforts to make services happen. It's one of the proudest moments that we of a congregation have, that services during the high holidays fit everyone who needed a place, not unlike Jerusalem that fit every Jew who came during the time of the Beit HaMikdash. And every congregant who wanted a place, whether inside or outside, had a place. But our services this year and the regalia and the pomp of our Hatanim is essentially lost, is essentially deferred. The closest you will come to it is the magnificent sartorial splendor in which you will see our Hatanim when they come to speak to you in a moment. But that's only one of the purposes of Hatanim. Leadership in services. Leadership in service, lacking just one S, says so much more. Leadership in service is what I saw just this week when on Thursday evening, the rabbi has a class he has to give to all of us who will call in for his just terrific Art and Torah series. Yet he's here at 6:30 because we needed a minyan for those of our congregants who were saying Kaddish, who had nachalot, who had commemorations of the loss of loved ones. And he didn't want us not to have a minyan. And it was only when he saw Dr. Edinger sitting in the corner that we had 10, that he knew that he could dive in quickly and then go make his class for the rest of us. That is leadership in service. And it's easy to think of the difference between service and services because service only has one S, services has two S's, like, I don't know, dessert and desert. I'll take anything else anybody has when we open this for everybody to talk. But the fact is, these are two people, and this is just the two of them, who live leadership in service to our congregation. I haven't even started talking about their families. I haven't even started talking about their wives. Leadership in service, I think, the rabbi will correct me, need not be gender-based. Leadership in services, we have a tradition, we have our rules, we will abide them. But leadership in service is not gender-based. And what Rose has done for our congregation over the decades, what Leah Lisa has done for our congregation just since they have been here, and not just our congregation, but for the West Side community as well, I could spend the rest of the morning talking about that. The Edingers have given us sexton, assistant choir, assistant chazan, Zachariah. Basically, I would take that trade right there. But that the family has given us so much, to me, is the leadership in service that is not just based on our Hatanim, although that would be enough. And I say the same for the Soloveichik family. Now, they don't have a Z yet, although their kids are home and every bar mitzvah kid is at every one of our services. And lest we all think that's so simple, please show me to be a fool. Why don't you in the next 30 days commit to coming just once or twice so that we're overflowing on the portico and we'll put great pressure on our paved paradise, our place next door, which I'll talk about a little later. The Constitution refers to a shochet, a ritual slaughterer. Our ritual slaughterer is here in the guise of Rabbi Rode, and the order of the service this morning will be that Rabbi Rode will come and will regale us with two tanus, or maybe it's twos tanu. First, for Dr. Edinger, our Hatan Torah, at which point Dr. Edinger will come and speak, and Rose will come and speak. Then, while the aerosols that I am spewing are silting down, Rabbi Rode from up at the Teva will then sing the Tanu to Rabbi Soloveichik, our Hatan Bereshit, at which point Leah Lisa will speak, and then Rabbi Soloveichik will speak. I will have a few words at the end that do matter, at least to me, so please don't start your desserts until after I'm done. Thank you very much.
Tinu Shivacha Vegam Shira Le'yotzer Ora Unoten Torah Tinu Shivacha Vegam Shira Le'yotzer ora unoten Torah Va'ish hazeh ha'eda b'chira lehashlim et ha'torah Ana nismach benefesh tehora. Ana nismach benefesh tehora. ונתפלל לאל הנורא עם האיש אשר נקרא להובע כאור התורה והשנימו על התורה בסימן טוב מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק יעקב משה ואהרון ודוד ושלמה הוא יברך וישמור וינצור ויעזור את הגביר הנעלה מרדכי נפתלי בר יעקב חתן תורה שישמיר תורת אלוהינו ביום חתונתו ויום שמחת ליבו הקהתי וישמע בקהל תלותי וישלח לו הקדוש ברוך הוא ברכה והצלחה לכל מעשה ידיו וכן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן תהילת אדוני Rabbi, ויברך כל בשר, שכל לעולם ועד.
I would like to start by quoting a verse in Dr. Poole's prayer book. If you look on page 1, the very first line, Dr. Poole instructs us that when we enter the synagogue, we should say this verse, Ba'ani barob chastecha avo beitecha eshtachave el heichal kochecha b'yiratecha. Because of your great kindness, I come into your house, I bow down in awe before your holy sanctuary. So that's what you're supposed to say when you enter the synagogue every day. I've never said it before. I don't know, I haven't seen or heard anybody else say it. But it is there in Dr. Poole's book, and it expresses my feelings precisely on this day. I have not been in this sanctuary, this room, since Purim, March 9th. So it's been 8 months since I entered this room, and it's because of God's kindness and that I'm able, despite what's going on, I'm able to be here today. And I bow down, we all bow down to this magnificent sanctuary. We are in awe of the architecture of this beautiful, beautiful room. Before I get to the heart of what I wanted to say, let me just tell you that 25 years ago, I served as a Hatan in this congregation. I was Hatan Bereshit. Dr. Gerstein was Hatan Torah. And we remember Dr. Gerstein. His Nachala was just a few weeks ago. He had the purest, sweetest voice. His personality was the sweetest personality. And we remember him, I remember him certainly because of this confluence of events. That this time I am Hatan together with Rabbi Soloveichik, who is the most eloquent and the most insightful darshan, most insightful speaker that we have in America. I have no doubt about that. That's my opinion. So it's a great honor to be linked with Rabbi Gerstein and Rabbi Soloveichik. Now, I would like to tell you how I got to be a member of this community. It's a little bit of an improbable story. And very often, Hatanim very often speak about this when they're honored. People in general speak about this, how they came to be members of this synagogue and of this community. They tell you their family were members, their friends were members, that's why they came here. They love the melodies, they love the choir, they love the dignity of the services, they love the history of the congregation. But my story is a little bit different. My story starts in December of 1964. I was a graduate student. It was my first year of graduate school. And in December of 1964, you see, what happened was I fell in love with a girl. I fell in love with Rose. And so there was no possibility of me going to any other synagogue or any other community than this one. As the Parnas mentioned, the Gedalia family has been associated with this synagogue for generations. My father-in-law, Rose's father, was the shamash for over 40 years. So that's what happened. Now, you know, I say it's an improbable story. You know, I'm not the first, nor will I be the last person, Ashkenazi person, to marry a Sephardi girl. You know, Ashkenazi boys fall in love with Sephardi girls all the time. That's not improbable. But what's improbable is where I came from. I came from a very different community than this one. My parents were expelled from Germany. They came here in 1939. My father was from Frankfurt am Main. My mother was from a small town in Bavaria. This was the immigration of the German Jews who left Germany. Many of them came to the United States. An even larger number went to Israel. They went to other countries in the world. Some of them were very famous. Nobel laureates, Albert Einstein. But my parents settled in Washington Heights. Now, the people who settled in Washington Heights they came from middle-class families in Germany. That community is mostly southern Germany, Frankfurt and the surrounding areas. There were about 20,000 people of German Jewish origin who moved to Washington Heights. And that community was, and as migrants in general in that community, they were very conservative, traditional, especially the people who came from that region of Germany. It was, in fact, a pretty insular community, certainly at the beginning when they were new to this country. Within that community, when they came, there were about 12 synagogues that were established. They didn't fit in, they didn't feel comfortable with the melodies and the customs of the American Jewish synagogues that were up there. So they built their own synagogues. They formed their own communities. There were 12 synagogues. I think there was one Reform and one Conservative, and the rest were Orthodox synagogues. It was a very traditional community. The most traditional, the most insular synagogue, also the largest of those German Jewish synagogues, was Breuer's. That's a synagogue. It's named after its founding rabbi. My parents were there. I went there. I went to synagogue there. They had schools. I went to school in their school system. It was a very well-organized community. It was very large and very well organized, and that's where I grew up. So one could say that I am a Yeki. One could say that. Now, let me define the term for you. This is in Wikipedia. You can look it up. Yeki is the term often used in a slightly derogatory or cynical manner, although it is also used as a compliment. It is used mainly in reference to the German Jews' legendary attention to detail and punctuality. This sense for detail extends into strict adherence to minhagim. So I agree with that definition, except the derogatory part. So very often people ask me, people knowing my background and knowing the family I married into, they often ask me, how were you able to transfer from one culture to another? These are two very radically different cultures. How were you able to make that transference? So what I really want to do with you today is go through the learning that I had to do, the adaptations I had to accept, and explain to you how one can make this transfer. So, of course, you have to observe carefully. you have to learn, you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable, and then you can move from one community to another. It can be done from one culture to another. So I've made a list of about 7 things, 7 categories of things that have to be accomplished and learned in order to make this transfer successfully. First of all, the first of the 7 is the similarities. There are a lot of similarities between German Jewish culture that I grew up in and the Sephardic culture that we have here. First of all, the decorum is obvious. Both communities have a level of synagogue decorum which is unmatched in other communities. Services are disciplined, they're organized, they're orderly. There is an emphasis on aesthetics, on formality. Before COVID, we used to have, when the Sefer Torah is taken out of the Ark, and then later when the Torah is returned to the Ark, there's a whole protocol that has to be followed. This makes every Prussian heart beat a little faster to see this single file march to return the Torah. The German Jewish community also, there's an emphasis on precision in reading the Torah. And the same applies here. We have a choir. The Yeki communities have choirs. Here we ask, we demand, we require that if one is called to the Sefer to read Torah, he wears a jacket, a tie, and a hat. The same applies in Washington Heights. There's a fidelity to traditional melodies, and both communities have that. So these similarities are very helpful for those of us who have to make this change. Now, our synagogue here has many German Jewish families in it, and I'm sure that these are the factors that attracted them to this synagogue, the kind of emphasis on the aesthetics of the service. Okay, those are the similarities. Let me now tell you some of the things that I had to learn, and that people who want to do this, make this change, also have to learn. The next thing is phonology and pronunciation of Hebrew. In German Jewish congregations, especially the first generation that was there are a lot of vowels said with umlauts and diphthongs. Those cannot be brought here. Cannot use those pronunciations here. Of course, everybody knows about the taf, the letter taf, with a dagesh and without a dagesh, that in the Sephardi pronunciation, there's no distinction between a taf with a dagesh and a taf without a dagesh. But then we have some things that are a little more difficult. We have the dreaded letter ayin. Now, what you have to do to learn it's pronounced here as ng. You have to practice by saying the phrase from Yigdal, notain the rasha rang l'rishanto, notain the rashang rang karishanto. Give to the wicked person evil as is his evil. Then we also have another phonological thing that you have to remember is that these are subtleties now. The bet without a dagesh, that here we don't make that distinction, not a strong distinction between a bet and a vet, between a bet with a dagesh and a bet without a dagesh. They're all pronounced like the letter B, basically. So when someone has a happy occasion, you say Mazal Tov, Mazal Tov. You don't say Tov. And the hardest phrase probably to get used to is what you say at the end of Shabbat. You say not Shavua Tov, you say Shabuang Tov. Shabuang Tov, that's what you have to say. So that's phonology. The next thing is things have different names in German congregations, Ashkenazi congregations, and our congregation. The word shul is a little bit suspect. You really should call it esnoga, the Spanish word for shul. This ark, this is the heichal. The reading table for the Torah, that's the teba. It's a different terms. Now, most people don't know this. Even some second, third generation German Jewish people don't remember that the first generation, they called the bima al-memar. Al-memar, that's an Arabic word. How an Arabic word gets into German Jewish vocabulary, I don't know, but that's the word that they used. You never daven. You never daven. Daven is a Judeo-German word. You never daven. You pray, you read. You read mincha, you pray mincha. You don't daven it. Some of the other, again, I'm not doing everything. I'm just doing the high points here. When the Torah is read and the Sefer is lifted up and raised up, and the congregation says, V'zot HaTorah, the word that's used here for that is not Hagba. The word is levantar. Levantar. It's also done before the reading of the Sefer, not after. That's here. So levantar is that mitzvah. The people who do that have to be trained. It's not easy to do levantar here without training. It has to be, you have to turn to the left and then stop at the 4 poles of the compass. It's a practiced kind of thing with a heavy load. Those people, they are called levantadores. Levantadores. It's like, in a bullfight, you have picadors, you have matadors, and here we have levantadores. You don't call it a Seder. My father-in-law never celebrated a Seder on Passover. It was a Haggadah. That was the word that was used. When a baby girl is born, the greeting to the father or the family is Mazal Tov, Mazal Tov. But for a boy, you say Besiman Tov. I don't know what the difference is, but that's the custom. The next thing, the fourth thing is foods. German families have different dietary customs than Sephardi families. First of all, I hadn't seen that before, but my wife has a spice rack in the kitchen. German foods don't have much in the way of spices. On Shabbat lunch, we had, up in the Heights, we had Grünkern soup. There's an umlaut in there, which, I can say it because it's a German word. Grünkern soup. That was our Shabbat afternoon lunch. American Ashkenazim say cholent, but the Sephardic dish is adafina. Now, cholent and adafina are very similar. They're different words, but they're very similar, especially in their effects, their detrimental effects on the digestive system. Another food item that I want to mention to you is in my wife's Sephardi family and other Sephardim that I've had the pleasure to dine with. When they say hamotzi, when they break bread and say hamotzi, they toss the bread to the people. So when I was when we were dating, or perhaps when we were engaged already, I'm not sure, I was invited to Shabbat here with my father-in-law and my wife, my wife. You can imagine everything. I was a little nervous about that. You know, you first meet your in-laws for the first time. There's a little bit of tension there. I saw that the kiddush was done. That was fine, and the wine was drunk. That was fine. And then there was hamotzi, and the bread goes flying to the people around the table. Now, German Jews don't throw food. They never throw food, and certainly not the hamotzi. And I was a little worried at that point. But you learn. You have to learn. You have to be flexible. You have to be adaptable. The fifth thing is time management. You know, Yekis are perfectionists when it comes to time management and punctuality. And our synagogue is pretty good at it, pretty good. But I want to tell you something about the German approach to punctuality, German Jewish approach to punctuality. You know, during the year, on weekdays, Shacharit in the morning starts at 7 a.m., except if there is some reason to start earlier. But Shacharit starts at 7 a.m. On the day after Yom Kippur, of course, they're very punctual. They come to synagogue all the time at 7 a.m. Everybody's there on time. But on the day after Yom Kippur, after the German Jews have repented all their sins, they start services at 5 minutes before 7. This is German Jewish punctuality, German Jewish piety. You don't start on time, you start 5 minutes earlier. Another thing that one has to learn is postural things. You have to learn when to sit, when to stand, when to bow. Now, I have to tell you something about that. So the German Jewish community, and I think many other Ashkenazic communities, for Musaf on Yom Kippur, everybody bows down onto the ground, like an Islamic prayer service. At certain points in the avodah, in the service at Musaf on Yom Kippur. So we were first married, but of course in this synagogue we don't do that. People don't go on the floor. They bow, but they don't go on the floor. On the first Yom Kippur after we were married, Rose came with me and we prayed in Breuer Synagogue, which was at the height of its eminence at that time. The synagogue was filled, maybe 900 people. And Rose, and they come to Musaf, they come to the Avodah, and at a certain place, the congregation goes down on the ground. My wife had no knowledge of this postural change. So she is standing there. And 899 people go down on the ground, and she's alone standing up. So these are the things that one has to learn. One has to learn these things. The seventh and last thing is the prayers. The prayers are somewhat different. Sephardim say piyutim from different origins, Spanish poets and so on and so forth. And the Ashkenazi, the German Jews use medieval Ashkenazic poetry. So one has to learn the prayer service in the two places in order to be able to adapt. So let me just say this. If in 1964, before I met Rose, a prophet had come to me, or an angel had come to me and prophesied that one day I would meet a beautiful girl, as American as apple pie. I would marry her in this sanctuary, on this very spot that I'm standing on, that I would attend this magnificent historic synagogue, that we would have 3 children, 2 of them who would get married right here, and that one day the Board of Trustees would honor me to be Hatan Torah, together with Rabbi Soloveichik. If he had prophesied that in 1964, I would not have believed him. And certainly I would not believe that I would be Hatan Torah and he would be merely Hatan Bereshit. That the Chazanim would sing to me, I would have said, you know, that's very, very improbable. I don't believe you. I would have said to that prophet. You know why I wouldn't believe you? Because I'm just a kid from Washington Heights. Things like that don't happen to kids from Washington Heights. And so I'm filled with gratitude at this time, gratitude to God, gratitude to my family, gratitude to the congregation, gratitude to the Board of Trustees and the officers, gratitude to the clergy, the Chazanim, over the years, who have made my life very pleasant, very beautiful, and very, very happy. And I want to express my gratitude to everybody for this great experience, the great experiences that I've had.
Hello, everyone. Henry, that was great. I learned so much about your background. I would like to thank the congregation for bestowing the honor of Hatan to Henry, my husband, and by extension to our family. I would also like to thank our president, our Parnas, Lou Solomon, for all that he has done and is doing to carry out, to continue in the way that the synagogue can go forward. Oh, sorry. I forgot to take my, okay, hi, it's me. And with that said, I really, I just have to repeat something that Henry said, and that is that this is the first time I'm standing in the sanctuary in, today is going to be almost 9 months, and it still has its awe. It still has its radiance. It still has its warmth. So I thank actually the congregation again for giving us this opportunity during this time of pandemic to actually enter into the congregation, to the building. I also, before I get started, I really feel a very special, I want to wish a very special birthday wish to one of our members. Colonel Mendes is going to be celebrating his 100th birthday, I believe, in 2 days. So Colonel Mendes, happy birthday and many happy returns, at least until 120. As many of you know or just heard, I grew up here, part of this historic congregation, privileged to have had the extended clergy be a part of my life. We lived right next door in number 18. By proximity, I practically grew up right here in this very building. I have wonderful, happy childhood memories, which I would like to share with you. As a child of 6 or 7, we summered in Fire Island, just a few streets from the pools, that is, Reverend Dr. and Mrs. David DeSolo Pool. Frequently on those long summer Shabbatot, we would walk over and visit Tamar and David DeSolo Pool, who always had an open house. Tamar, as she would like to be called, would take down some china figurines from the mantel and for me to play, while the adults would talk. I can still visualize their large house near the beach. Back in the city, those open houses morphed into Open House Tuesday, or once a month Tuesdays. They were living in the parsonage, and at the end of the evening services, we would enter into their living room through the connecting doors that would go from their home into the synagogue. They were located on the same level as the ladies' gallery, and of course you could enter from Central Park West. The townhouse had multiple floors. Attached to the steps was an inclinator. While the adults were talking amongst themselves, some of us kids took turns riding up and down on the inclinator. That is, until we got caught. Rabbi Dr. Gerstein and family were the next occupants of the parsonage. Abby, Dr. Gerstein's daughter, and I would at times get together, Shabbat afternoons. On rainy Shabbatot, I would shortcut through the sanctuary and walk through the ladies' gallery to get to their home. The Cardozo family also lived in 18 West. On occasion, our families happily got together. Bram and my father would play the piano, as well as we all sang selections from show tunes and, of course, Zemirot. What I came to realize later was our families were always intertwined with each other. There was a fine gray line between social and work. Rabbi, Chazan, and sexton, with the addition of many congregants who would spice up my life. For me, that meant a trip to the zoo with Mrs. Fink, or riddle cards from Mona Oppenheim when I was at home in bed with the mumps. And of course, my longtime friendship with Esme Berg. Esme reminded me of a feeling that we always had when we were kids. We would come into shul, and one of the first things we would always do is look at the ladies and the women, and they were all well dressed. I mean, it was a different generation. We were generations, I guess. We were all well dressed, and as children, we also wore hats. And Esme and I were mentioning what fun it was in the spring, especially, to go shopping and buy a new straw hat with a ribbon that wrapped around and trailed down in the back. And we would come to synagogue and just, feel so proud of ourselves. We too were wearing hats. It was something that was special that went with the society of, at the time, of dressing up for Shabbat. For me, that meant, wait, I said that already. The synagogue was definitely a huge part of my family's life and for me. Another memory that I have is actually coming into synagogue, coming right into this room and watching the changing of the cloaks. What that means is I would come in and I'd see my father up in front of the Hechal. The Hechal was open, and he would be taking down the Sifrei Torah and handing them to each of the young college boys that came to volunteer and to be with them. And they would take them down, and then they would lie them on the benches on each side. And it was like just rows and rows of the Torah resting on the benches. They would go and take the rimonim off and then they took the cloaks off, and guess what? Then they put the new cloaks on, they put the rimonim back on, and everything went in reverse, and they would come and very carefully carry the Torah back to the Hechal, and they would be placed up. Some of the volunteers were the Turiel boys, and the other is our well-beloved Arnie Goldfarb. I would stand here in awe, watching the transformation of, let's say, going from red to all of a sudden, these beautiful, soft pastel colors. The changing of the cloaks was and still is time-consuming, as Rabbi Rode and Edinger can attest to. I think what I'm trying to convey to you all is how the synagogue was and still is an integral part of my childhood. I feel very fortunate to have married Henry, our Hatan Torah, someone who from day one felt so comfortable with our Sephardic minhagim. It was because of Henry's willingness to live on the Upper West Side that we were able to have our children grow up in this community. And what warms my heart today is that I see, at least with one of my children, I have grandchildren that will be growing up in this very community. So the continuity of generations is still going to continue. An appropriate memory to share is Simchat Torah. This year, unfortunately, because of this pandemic, we are not able to join in the services as we know it. So I'm going to just ask you to imagine the start of evening services. The doors on either side of the entrance of the sanctuary are open. The Hatanim, accompanied by the Parnas and the Sagan, respectively, are ushered in to the choir singing Baruch Haba. They walk slowly to the bankas, to the right and to the left. And that in itself is a visual. They are also dressed in their white tails. The dress that they're wearing today is morning suits that they would wear the following morning in the services. The next highlight, of course, is the anticipated Tenushbacha that has been sung year after year after year by our accomplished Chazanim. This would set the stage for the very dignified Simchat Torah service the following day. Abby Gerstein-Chill wrote to me her memory of Simchat Torah very succinctly. She says, "It was the capstone holiday of a spiritually rich season, as with pageantry, music, and suspense." In the 1950s, the excitement of Simchat Torah happened downstairs in front of the Levi Auditorium. We, the children of the congregation, with the children of the Polonese Talmud Torah, anxiously waited for Mrs. Pfeffer, the principal of the Polonese Talmud Torah, to open the center doors. Rushing in, we were handed flags and told not to run. Judy Cardozo Tenenbaum remembers the flags as well, and she wrote, "When we were given flags on real wooden sticks, along with reminders to keep them upright." We lined up on the right side of the movable hechal that had not been dismantled from the high holidays overflow services. Small paper Sifrei Torah were handed out. Girls and boys marched together. We sang a mix of songs as we waved our flags. Judy Cardozo and Annette Gorgie remember the songs Tododel, Ein Kelohenu, Adon Olam, and Yimlach. Annette Gorgie fondly recollects going around the circle and marching by my father and waving. After parading around, we lined up along the west wall where a table stacked with boxes of Israeli elite chocolate was set up. We happily moved along, approaching Mrs. Pfeffer with excitement. She handed us one bar of bittersweet chocolate. We've come a long way from the 1950s. Children parading with their fathers in the main sanctuary. The choir singing down in the men's section. Women having their own hakafot. And of course, culminating with the Haberman and Lustig delicious ice cream party. This year, of course, is the exception. One day when the pandemic is behind us, we will once again return to the synagogue, find our seats, become immersed in the beauty of our familiar service of prayer, the service that is steeped with minhag, steeped with pageantry, steeped with music, and yes, steeped with suspense. Mazal tov to our honored Hatanim. Thank you.
Tenu Shivaha Vega Shira Labili Reshi Uli Achlet Tenu Shivaha Vega Shira Labili Reshi Uli Achlet Aish Hazeh Hangeda Bachera Le'atchil et Torah Ora Nesmach Menefesh Tehora Venit Mala Elanora Imahish Asher Nikra Le'omeang Yehorador Va'atchilo Alador Torah V'siman tov mi sheberach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Moshe ve'Aaron ve'David u'Shlomo hu yevarech ve'yishmor ve'yintzor ve'yachzor et hagevir hanegela Morenu Arab Ne'im Zemirot Israel Meir Yaakov Bar Eliyahu Halevi Hatan Bereshit שהתחיל תורת אבות אלוהינו ביום חתונתו ויום שמחת ליבו מלכה דהלמה הוא יברך יתה, ויזכה יתה, וישמע בקהל צלותה, ישלח לו הקדוש ברוך הוא, ברכה והצלחה במעשה ידיו, וכן יהי רצון ונאמר אמן. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה.
Tradition, renewal, Torah, Bereshit. The offices of Hatan Torah and Hatan Bereshit, like so much else here, have a long history in our congregation, dating back for hundreds of years. In fact, as Lou referenced a little earlier today, Hatan Torah and Hatan Bereshit are two of the very earliest offices recorded in the Shearith Israel Constitution. Taken together, Torah and Bereshit represent what is the best about our community, what it means for us to be a community. The Torah represents our faith and tradition and the source of our being. Bereshit represents beginning and renewal and spiritual rebirth. The Shearith Israel's story in this country is how the first prong, Torah, sustained our community through the second prong, each Bereshit, each new trial and challenge for 300 years and more. If Shearith Israel is about Torah and Bereshit, Torah and beginnings, over the past 7 months, our community has faced a new and difficult challenge, another new beginning. For 7 months, while our 6 children teleschooled on every available device in our home, in every corner, I kid you not, we emptied closets and stashed kids under the table to take advantage of pockets of Wi-Fi access. And we became in-house IT, tech support, learning a deep appreciation for the work that IT does, and hibernated with our kids all summer. We periodically scraped them off the ceiling when that got too much. And I worked in my little office, so to speak, on a couch, on a corner of the couch, surrounded by a ring of used coffee cups and the detritus of all of our small fry. Through all that long time, Sally was always parked at the dining room table, poring over Sfarim and articles, and typing at the keyboard, working on the next broadcast to Shearith Israel, and the next, and the next. I saw how Sally reached out to the community day in and day out, laboring endlessly on constant programs airing inspirational Torah topics and engaging in all sorts of virtual communication with far-flung members. I saw viscerally how the Torah served as a way to bind us as a community and provided comfort even when we were not physically together. It is said that the 2 poles inserted on the side of the Aron Habrit, the Ark of the Covenant, for carrying the Aron through the desert after Mount Sinai, those poles were never later removed, even when the first Beit HaMikdash was built and the Aron no longer had to travel. The poles were never removed in order to symbolize, some say, that we as Am Yisrael, as the Jewish people, are meant to bear the Torah with us wherever we go, whether secluded in our apartments, on solitary walks in state parks, or at last attending the carefully crafted health protective services here at Shearith Israel. But it is not just about our past conduct to meet this new challenge. It is also about our way forward. The Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah recounts that before the world was created, other worlds were created and destroyed. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveichik talks about the point intended to be conveyed by creating and destroying and creating again. Rav Soloveichik explained that the point may not be literal, but rather, just as the master of the universe began anew and man was created in the image of the master of the universe, so too does man have the capacity to begin again, anew. And for the Jewish people, the Torah is the source of that capacity. That's how this community, Shearith Israel, a remnant of Israel, made its original new beginning in Amsterdam, and then again in the New World in South America, and then again in New Amsterdam, right here in New York. And whenever there was a challenge since our founding, it was to the Torah that our community turned to help guide us through. Sally and I are privileged to share this moment with the Edinger family and feel that Hatan Torah is so fitting, so apt for Rose and Henry represent the traditions of Shearith Israel, its connection between past and future, and its dedication to Torah conduct. And as we celebrate this Hatan Bereshit, we look forward to more Bereshits to come, more new beginnings, bringing us physically all together back to the sanctuary that we love, back to Shearith Israel, back to our spiritual home.
First, I want to thank Lou for his leadership and for his vision at all times, but especially during this time. I want to thank Rabbi Rode for his beautiful Tnu Shebacha and all my colleagues who are such a blessing to work with every day of the year. And I want to echo Lealiza in expressing how honored we are to share this moment with Henry and Rose, because for us, they are Shearith Israel in the way that they serve as role models to our community. In preparing for this event, I initially faced one of the most enigmatic ritual conundrums of my rabbinate, which was, what precisely do I wear at this occasion? After all, I am rabbi and minister of the congregation. I'm the 10th minister since the revolution, though I don't usually like to talk about that. Never at a moment of celebration in the sanctuary had I not donned the canonicals. On the other hand, the Hatanim are required, as Rose mentioned, to wear morning dress. So I had to seek guidance, and I was told that my role as Hatan supersedes my status as rabbi and minister, and so morning dress it is. And I have accepted this ruling in a realm of halakha that is far beyond my own expertise. And I have to say, I do feel pretty amazing. But at the same time, I still feel that as honored as I am to have the title of Hatan placed upon me, given that this is just the beginning of my Hatanship, just the Bereshit of my Hatan Bereshit, I'd like to devote my brief remarks by focusing on the other office that I hold here, which remains in my life one of the most profound sources of meaning. For me, the experience of the last strange 6 months, 7 months, 8 months have been bracketed by two extraordinary moments. Both took place in the precise place where I stand right now in the sanctuary. And there's no question that long after life, please God, soon returns to normal, I will still always remember these two experiences, moments no rabbi ever expected, but moments no rabbi would ever forget. The first came in March, almost immediately after the lockdown began, when we were unexpectedly shut down for the first time since our community fled in 1776, when the British landed in Manhattan. I spoke to the synagogue right before Shabbat, and I noted that the Hebrew term for synagogue is Beit Knesset. And the reason for this is that in the rabbinic tradition, the phrase Knesset, Knesset Yisrael, the Assembly of Israel, refers to the mysterious bonds that join Jews across time and space. We are connected even when we are apart. 1 week after delivering this talk, it was in our Beit Knesset during the week, speaking by live stream, that I lectured on the subject of the lonely man of faith and on how we can feel these covenantal forces binding all of us. I stood here, right here to speak, as I do so often from this podium. But this time, for the first time, I had no one physically in front of me. It's difficult to describe how disconcerting this was. The rabbinic speaker draws energy from his audience. And since I usually spoke in the sanctuary only on Shabbat, that had by and large been the only audience that I knew. But as I spoke to the camera in the vast empty sanctuary, the description of covenantal connection suddenly became reified, for me, a primal experience. The vast emptiness of the magnificent sanctuary seemed suddenly full, bespeaking the generations of Jews who had prayed there, whose births, bar and bat mitzvahs, and weddings were celebrated there, whose deaths were mourned there. Those Jews whose presence now remained there all the same. And rightly understood, how could it be otherwise? After all, as Leilisa just said in her exquisite and eloquent remarks, Shearith Israel had originated in a group of remnants of Jews who found themselves quite literally on the other side of the continent, on the other side of the ocean, with the vastness of the Atlantic between them and their mother community. To feel disconnected, to disappear would have been so easy. To maintain one's Jewishness could only have been achieved by a feeling of a profound bond to the Jewish people from whom they seemed to be cut off. We Jews love to speak about our fractured relationship within the larger Jewish people. We tell jokes about a Jewish Robinson Crusoe who built 2 synagogues on a desert island so he could have 1 synagogue that he did not attend. But these early American Jews felt instead a bond to others, to those they had left behind, and to the traditions of Torah Judaism. They saw themselves as joined in Knesset Israel, past and posterity, and if it could be felt by a few Jews alone on the other side of the ocean, could it not be felt amongst us all in the seeming solitude of our own homes? And in truth, it is the positions of Hatanim that embody this bond. Our love of the Torah scroll is made most exquisitely manifest in the fact that we celebrate joyously the conclusion of its reading, and then we immediately begin again. We cannot pull ourselves away. And no one expresses their love for the Torah scrolls, no one adorns them with more glory and grandeur than our synagogue. How we feel about the Torah was expressed beautifully by Leilisa last year, when she gave us her vision of saving and restoring our Sifrei Torah from across the world that reside in our sanctuary and which tell our story. She wrote in her email to the community as follows. She wrote, "Our Torah scrolls, some of ancient vintage, have been gathered from the 4 corners of the globe, their very tatters a testament and treasure, evicting," she continued, "the profound love of evincing, the love making manifest, the profound love of past generations for our traditions under trying conditions, and the enduring faith of people in all times, in all places. It seems to me," she continued, "that to see yourself as part of Shearith Israel's stories, to see yourself in the Torah scrolls that embody the profound devotion and dedication to our traditions, spanning so many generations, while preserving," she concluded, "the marvelous diversity from which our members have been drawn," end quote. This is perfectly put, and it is this devotion and dedication that I felt, the devotion and dedication of generations, that I felt as I stood right here alone, but not lonely, the pulsating covenantal kedusha radiating from the Heichal and throughout the room. Half a year later, I stood again in the synagogue for Kal Nidre. Services beginning a bit earlier than usual so we could share by live stream this cherished moment with those who could not attend. I stood on the teba as I usually do, but not as I usually do. Usually the sanctuary was full, now it was sparse and socially distanced. Usually I am ensconced, enveloped in the sanctity of our many Sifrei Torah that crowd the small space in the center of the sanctuary. Now I stood alone. The talet was over my head, as it is only on the high holy days, but this time I also wore a mask and a face shield, enclosed in a strange, seemingly suffocating cocoon. It was a strange sense of solitude that descended for a holy day that is usually marked by the presence of so many. But then I began the words that start the service, which evoke a connection across time and space. B'shiva shel malu, b'shiva shel mata. In heaven above and on the earth below. And then suddenly in the solitude, I felt connected to all of you, to all of us. And in that moment of that strange, secluded Kippur, standing on the teba, a feeling wholly unexpected was suddenly, primally felt. Gratitude. Because the greatest form of meaning in life comes from being part of something larger than ourselves. And it is this sense that has come from being part of this community, which is unlike any other. And so I thank Shearith Israel for this great honor of Hatanhood. But I thank you above all for what it means to minister here. A feeling that the last strange and trying months have rendered much more profound. I look forward to many more moments here in the sanctuary when the covenantal connection that we will experience will stem from the joy and the warmth of each other's presence. May that moment come very soon.
Rabbi Leah, Lisa, Henry, Rose, thank you. We are now in 2020, 5781. We've left 1705. I wanted to say two final things. The first is that I wanted to, by the way, just before I start, I wanted to thank a different Zaharia, but the guy who's doing the video and his colleague. I thank you, and I also thank you for explaining that our entire congregation seems to be stuffed into the tripod that you have there. So now I understand where everybody is. I'm a pretty quick study. Thank you, everybody, for your beautiful, really beautiful remarks. I heard, I think, only one lie. I don't believe the Soloveichiks have an empty closet, but I've never known Leah Lisa to lie, and so I have to accept that as truth, just like everybody's stuffed into that tripod. We usually have our Hatanim celebration on Shabbat Bereshit. It is usually a time just after our high holidays are over. It is usually a time when we have a great deal of gratitude for everybody who makes it happen. In 1705, the Parnas had only the Hatanim. In 5781, in the year 2020, there are a great many people who made this year happen. I want to take a minute and thank them. To begin, we had two separate services, one indoor, one outdoor. And the outdoor service at the Manhattan Day School, I want to thank Rabbi Soloveichik. He comes up a lot. He's in a lot of places. I don't actually know how he does all of that. I suspect, Leah Lisa, there is more than one, but I leave that to you to figure out. Rabbi Soloveichik was there, Reverend Edinger, Mark Aaron, Rafe Sasson, Ellie Sasson, Jonathan Nathan, Isaac and Alexander Haberman made those services work. Here at the synagogue, Rabbi Soloveichik, he's kind of a theme throughout all this. Rabbi Rode, beautiful services this year. Avery Newmark, who had to step in and and we said to him, all right, Avery, here, we need you to lead 47 services in the next 37 minutes. And he said, okay, no problem. The entire Newmark family deserves our great thanks. But in addition to the Newmarks, Jack Darr, Mark Aaron, Hillel Newmark, I want to thank John Quinones, Miguel Santiago, Ised Rodriguez, and Olivo Lopez, not just for the work that they did to make those services happen, but every day they are checking people. Every day they're keeping us safe. Every day they're standing outside, rain or shine, to try to help us keep safe. I want to thank Sarah Gross, Sarah Rosenberg, Ruth Yaski, who are the office staff who also make all of this happen, Barbara Rice, our executive director, Bonnie Barrist. To the two of them, I say I'm sorry I didn't use part of my day job to help you negotiate a better deal, since you've gotten, because you're each doing 4 jobs right now, and somehow I think you should have negotiated that one better. We cannot thank you enough. I want to thank, in addition, and in my capacity as Parnas, and I'm quite sure I have no authority to do this, grant honorary Hatanim hood to our COVID reintegration, our reentry working group. There are 15 congregants who, since the spring, have been tirelessly toiling to try to figure out what is the safest way for us to re-enter. I want to thank each of them. Ari Sherizan, Avery Newmark, Barbara Rice, Bonnie Barrist, Gabe Goldstein, John Quinones, Dr. Jonathan Tobin, Karen Darr, Karen, one of our Seganim, who I can't thank enough for all of the work she does for the congregation, Stan Town, Dr. Louis Lipsy, Dr. Michael Gelman, Dr. Vicky Ben Gwalid, who is also a trustee, Zachariah Edinger, and Rabbi Soloveichik ex officio. He shows up even there. The last thing I wanted to say was, looking forward just a little bit, I wanted to share a thought. I think it's actually a lovely thought from my beautiful wife, or maybe it's a beautiful thought from my lovely wife, but I think they're both apt, who reminded me that Hatan, in its common parlance, also means bridegroom, also has a very forward-looking quality to it. And as the rabbi said, the moments over the last 8 months that have been most uplifting have been those that have been forward-looking. It's when we have been able to listen to his classes soaring on wings of eagles, when we have been able to celebrate a britot, the britot that we've had here, or a bar mitzvah, or something forward-looking. And it was in that guise that we announced that in the middle of all of this, we are cleaning up 8 West. This is the empty lot, the construction site next door. And I borrowed a phrase from Joni Mitchell, paved paradise, using it in a way better than I thought she had, or at least more positive, until I read just since about the synagogue in Offenbach, Germany, where in 1916 the rabbi said, we are now part of society here. We have arrived in paradise. And the synagogue was badly damaged during Kristallnacht, and the Gestapo occupied it during the Second World War. However, Offenbach was one of the first cities that rebuilt a synagogue after the Second World War. I do not think there is the remotest resemblance between what that generation experienced and what we are experiencing. At the same time, we've said for many months that few of us have gone through the kind of isolation, the limitation of our freedom of movement, the absence of social intercourse and camaraderie, what I describe as the Groundhog Day monotonous repetition of monotony that this pandemic has visited on us. And so it was in that context that we said, okay, we have a project, we are going to embrace it as a congregation. We are going to rebuild our next door, we're going to make it fitting for larger outdoor space for services. And I think over the next few years, other activities that I think the rabbi will fill that space if, as and when the city will allow us to fill it, whether socially distant or not. I want to thank both Hatanim who have agreed to make this project one that they are getting behind. So if you get calls from them, please respond. I'm listening to Nava. I agree. And she too is behind. And not to put too fine a point on it, but just before I came, I got an email from Ari Sherazin, who is responsible for all of this and who the depth of our gratitude really can't thank enough, that said, do not overpromise the timing of when we will be in that space. And so with the power invested in me, I intend to overpromise as follows. December 10th this year at night is the first night of Hanukkah. And we will thank Rabbi Soloveichik in advance. We will thank Rabbi Rode in advance. We will thank Zachariah Edinger in advance for lighting the Hanukkah candles, in having our own Hanukkah abayit, whatever the place looks like, on the first night of Hanukkah, where we will greet everyone in person, socially distanced, or over Zoom. And we thank you all very much for that. Now, I'm supposed to say that there is an ability by our technical people to open this up so that the kudos and the yelps and the cries of happiness and joy that everyone is about to hear can resonate within this congregation and lift us up in a way that we only get usually on Yom Kippur when we sing all of the prayers together. But with that in mind, let me thank everybody and ask our videographer to now open this up. Thank you all very much.
Hazak Baruch.
Chazak Baruch.
The congregation and to everybody involved in making this a beautiful event.
Thank you, Avery.
Azaku Baruch. Beautiful. We're so proud of you.
Thank you,
Hazak
Brian.
Baruch. Mazal tov. Mazal tov.
Hazak Baruch to each of our Hatanim. Many years, muchos años.
Mabruk. Mazal tov.
Chazak Baruch and Mazal Tov.
Hazaku Baruch.
Hazaku Baruch. It's so great to see so many members of the community here coming together the way we do each year for the Hatanim. It was extraordinary. Chazakinu Bruchim to all.